Good evening, listeners. It's time to settle in for another chilling story of suburban suspense. From the slumbering heads of Mount Rushmore to the twin and windy cities. From the unseen depths of the Great Lakes to the rustling husks of cornfields across the heartland. Who knows what ghouls and crawling creatures lurk among us under the Midwest moon?
The hatchback. The way back of the car. A safe enough seat. At least that's what we were told. As kids, we would cram ourselves into the backpack, knees to chest, testing the limits of car sickness with our backward view and insistence on reading or playing games on unlit screens. We didn't know how close we were to greater danger. We were in our own world. A world that bled into a monster realm, right within reach of something sinister trying to claw its way out. One summer, with childhood 2 decades behind her, Jaya joined her friends Pete and Logan in loading up her car with sleeping bags and groceries for a weekend away. Pete knew a spot not far out of town where they could hike and swim and cook out. On the winding drive out, Jaya sat in the back seat, ice-filled bottles and backpacks jostling against her legs. The perspective from the middle back felt happily familiar, reminding her of family trips, picnics in the canyon, and weekends fishing in the hills. The giant cooler pressing into her arm was a childhood relic. A blue plastic Coleman that had housed everything from baseball Gatorades to glistening rainbow trout. Her dad used to tease her, telling her there was a surprise at the bottom of the cooler, hidden among the root beer and rocket pops. He would plunge his hand into the ice bath like Father Christmas, reaching into his sack, and come out with a polished rock or neon keychain. Each surprise made Jaya more convinced of the cooler's magic. A bottomless frozen treasure trove. The cooler hadn't seen much use the last few years. Neither had the back of Jaya's car. Her day-to-day life fit snugly in the passenger seat, and packing for this weekend was the first time in months she'd needed to pop the hatch. Once they reached the site, the three made quick work of setting up camp for the night. Then, as the sun set behind the hills, they threw down saucer cones and a glow-in-the-dark soccer ball for a quick pickup game. The friends hustled after the ball in the growing dark, tiki torches posted around the grass like warm stadium lights. They jogged back and forth across the makeshift pitch, laughing at their efforts and sweating in the sticky humidity. After several runs, Jaya pressured Pete, getting in his face for a steal. She launched the ball to Logan and heaved a deep breath, winded, when movement beyond the field stopped her mid-stride. Some kind of animal had raced by, just visible in the candlelight, quick and sleek and untamed. "Hey, did you see that?" Jaya panted, suddenly stock still. "Guys, there's something out there. I think it looked like a wolf." Pete and Logan slowed. Neither had seen what Jaya had, but Logan offered to investigate. He passed the soccer ball to Pete and jogged toward the clearing where Jaya was staring. His head and shoulders glowed brighter and brighter as he approached the flame of a tiki torch. Once he'd passed, his orange silhouette slowly faded until the dark swallowed him whole. Jaya could hear his footsteps for a stretch, but then, nothing. The pair still on the field breathed for several moments before panic kicked in. "Logan?" Pete finally called into the night. No response. Jaya met Pete's eyes. Worry shadowed his face. The silence seemed to stretch on forever until a scream tore through the campsite, loud and pained and unmistakably Logan's. Pete sprinted toward the invisible horizon where Logan had disappeared. Jaya followed after, terrified of what lay ahead, but too scared of losing sight of Pete to hang back. She raced after his dim form and collided full-bodied into him when he suddenly stopped short. At Pete's feet, hunched in the dirt, was Logan. Not hurt, not crying, but laughing at their prank. Jaya blinked tears from her eyes and shoved Pete's shoulder before dogpiling on Logan, anger and relief swirling inside of her. That night, after their adrenaline had ebbed and they'd finished their dinner, the friends doused the fire and turned in. Jaya slept with her pillow beside the cooler, its hard sides giving the illusion of protection, and lifted her head every 20 minutes to make sure both men were still there. When she did fall asleep, a shadowy monster stalked her dreams, a creeping thing with dark, matted fur and menacing eyes. In the nightmare, she'd raced to her car for safety, only for the back hatch to transform into a gaping, angry mouth. The next morning, Jaya awoke to the jangled nerves. She hoped some coffee and sunlight would clear the funk pressing in on her. Pete suggested a hike, and she thought that getting her body moving might work. The trio set out on a marked route that circled the lake and led up some nearby hills. The three weren't quite to the base of the first hill when Jaya started to feel weak and not herself. Her steps faltered as a dark border crept in around her vision, narrowing it. Without warning, she collapsed. Her body crumbled to the ground like the spirit had gone out of her. Logan ran to her and fanned her face until she could sit up. When Jaya's breathing had steadied, Logan helped her up, then slow-walked her to the car, supporting her weight as they moved. Pete opened the hatch and pushed aside bags to make space for her to sit. Sunsick and exhausted, she slumped into the hatchback. She sat on the edge of the car so that her legs dangled out the back like lifeless mannequin limbs. Asthma? Logan asked. She snorted weakly and told him no. She was just sensitive to the heat. She insisted the guys go back to the hike. She'd sip water and rest until she felt less dizzy. The guys lingered a few minutes beside the campsite before taking her advice and heading back to the trail. When they'd gone, Jaya closed her eyes and lay back into the dark of the car. She tried to take deep breaths, remembering the times as a little girl when she would get lightheaded. Lying down had always helped, kept her from completely passing out. Lying still in the shade made her feel better. Relaxed even. She hovered on the edge of nodding off, her chest rising and falling peacefully, when her trance was fractured by the sound of a faint growl. She froze, praying she'd imagined it, but straining to hear it again. Then a scrape against the car, and a shock of fur rubbing against her leg set her bolt upright. She sat up into sudden, complete darkness. Her heart was in her throat as she searched around her, finding nothing but cold blackness. She felt impossibly like she'd disappeared, been pulled somehow into another world. Nothing around her felt right or made sense, and something very near her, unseen but close, wanted her. Above her in the blackness was a small rectangle of light. Jaya moved toward the bright opening, almost as though she were swimming up to meet it, when a claw swiped at her arm, and then her leg, tearing her shorts and drawing blood. A hairy beast lunged at her in the strange nightmarescape. She screamed with everything in her. She kicked her legs as hard as she could, straining against the cold and reaching up toward the light with a desperate, outstretched hand. Suddenly, Jaya felt something take hold of her arm, gripping it fiercely. She screamed again, struggling against its pull. In a thrashing, chaotic moment, Pete pulled Jaya up through the cooler, lifting her from the box of melting ice and seltzers. The guys had come running at the sound of screams. When Pete saw Jaya's hand shoot up out of the water-sloshed cans, he grabbed hold. Jaya stayed clutching Pete's arms, gasping in the grass. She was soaked and torn up, but she was safe, and even more convinced of the cooler's magic, her childhood wonder having it morphed into terror at the sight of the monstrous Hatchback.